You won't want to miss this. Before we jump in, hit subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. The galactic Nexus station hung like a polished diamond against the velvet backdrop of space, its gleaming spires and transparent domes reflecting starlight in hypnotic patterns. Through one of its docking bays, the transport shuttle Resolute glided to a perfect landing, its thrusters cooling with a soft hiss. Commander Archer Ray stepped onto the station's immaculate deck. His muscular frame, honed from years of special operations training, was barely concealed by his form-fitting gray athletic outfit, a sleeveless tank that revealed well-defined arms and shorts that showcased powerful legs. His light brown hair fell in casual waves across his forehead, still damp from the quick shower he had taken after the mission debriefing. Hours of shore leave, Captain Harrington had told him before departure. Use it wisely, you've earned it. The Proxima Centauri peacekeeping mission had been a disaster waiting to happen. Diplomatic tensions, covert operations, and a final extraction under heavy fire. Archer had personally carried an injured ambassador to safety while returning fire, ensuring there were no casualties. It was just another day at the office for an Alliance Special Operations medic. Now, all he wanted was a stiff drink and a quiet corner to unwind. The panoramic lounge on the station's uppermost level offered breathtaking views of the surrounding starscape. It was a sanctuary for travelers, a place where the vastness of space seemed less daunting. Archer found a quiet corner table and ordered a Martian whiskey. Neat. The amber liquid burned pleasantly as it went down, loosening the knots of tension in his shoulders. And that's when he saw her. She sat alone at the bar, her turquoise skin glowing softly under the ambient lighting. Silver hair cascaded over her slender shoulders, a striking contrast to her exotic complexion. Her black patent bodysuit clung to her lithe frame, its deep neckline leaving little to the imagination. Yet it wasn't her appearance that caught Archer's attention. It was the way she winced every time she shifted position, her hand occasionally reaching down to massage her calf. Years of medical training kicked in, overriding his desire for solitude. He approached casually, whiskey in hand. "Muscle strain?" he asked, nodding toward her leg. She turned, startled, revealing eyes of such intense blue they seemed to glow. Her pupils narrowed slightly, a non-human physiological response, as she assessed him. "What business is it of yours, human?" Her voice carried a melodic quality despite the sharp tone. Archer shrugged. "Just an observation. I'm a field medic. That looks like a grade 2 solia strain, judging by how you're favoring it." She regarded him with suspicion, one elegant eyebrow arched. "And I suppose you're offering to help out of the goodness of your heart." "Actually, yes." He smiled, taking the empty seat beside her. "Commander Archer Ray, Alliance Special Operations." After a moment's hesitation, she replied, "Iona." "No rank or affiliation." "Interesting. Well, Iona, I could help with that leg if you'd like. Simple massage techniques can reduce recovery time by up to 50%. She snorted delicately. "I've heard that line before. Is this how humans typically initiate mating rituals?" Archer laughed. "If it were a line, it'd be a terrible one. I'm just offering professional assistance. Take it or leave it." Iona studied him for a long moment before gesturing to the empty lounge seat beside her. "Very well, Commander. Show me this miraculous human healing technique." Archer moved to the cushioned bench, creating space for her to extend her leg. When she hesitated, he added, "I've treated dozens of species. Professional courtesy only." With obvious reluctance, she pivoted and extended her leg across his lap. The smooth turquoise skin felt cool beneath his fingertips as he gently probed the muscle. "This might be uncomfortable at first," he warned, finding the tight knot of muscle tissue. His thumbs pressed in with practiced precision, applying firm pressure to the trigger point. Iona inhaled sharply, her back stiffening. Then, as he continued working the muscle, her eyes widened in surprise. You're doing something incredible," she murmured, the pain visibly dissipating from her expression. "Just targeting the fascial adhesions while stimulating blood flow to the damaged tissue," he explained, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Human massage techniques developed over thousands of years. We might be newcomers to galactic society, but we've had plenty of time to figure out how to fix our own bodies. As he worked, he noticed the subtle changes in her posture. The relaxation of her shoulders, the softening of her expression. The initial suspicion in her eyes gave way to something else entirely. "So, what happened?" he asked, focusing on a particularly tight knot. "This kind of strain doesn't happen from casual walking." Iona hesitated before answering. "Training accident. I was practicing some defensive maneuvers." Archer nodded, not pressing further despite recognizing the evasion. The muscle damage pattern suggested something more intense than simple training. "Almost done," he said, applying final pressure to release the remaining tension. "How does it feel now?" Iona flexed her foot experimentally, eyes widening in surprise. "The pain is gone." She stood, testing her weight on the leg, then executed a perfect pivot that would have been impossible minutes earlier. "Completely gone." "Good as new," Archer confirmed, finishing his whiskey. "Just try to avoid whatever defensive maneuvers caused it for at least 24 hours. He expected her to leave immediately, their brief interaction concluded. Instead, she slid back onto the seat beside him, signaling the bartender. 2 Centaurian brandies, she ordered, then turned to Archer with a smile that transformed her already beautiful face into something breathtaking. "The least I can do is buy you a proper drink, Commander. That swill you're drinking is an insult to actual whiskey." Archer raised an eyebrow. "You know human spirits." "I make it my business to know many things," she replied. Accepting the iridescent blue drinks from the bartender, she handed one to Archer, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Especially about cultures that interest me." The brandy tasted like liquid starlight, smooth, warm, with complex notes that evolved as it traveled down his throat. Archer couldn't help the appreciative sound that escaped him. "Good, isn't it?" Iona's smile turned playful. "There are many pleasures in this galaxy that humans have yet to discover." The subtle shift in her tone wasn't lost on him, nor was the way her gaze lingered on his arms and chest. "I'm always eager to learn," he replied, matching her smile with one of his own. Neither of them noticed the 3 figures watching from across the lounge, their expressions darkening as they observed the unexpected connection forming between the human and the turquoise-skinned woman. "That's her," one whispered to the others, his voice low and urgent. "And that's our problem," another replied, eyes narrowing. "The human needs to disappear." Archer Ray felt the sharp gaze of the figures across the lounge, though he didn't acknowledge them. His attention remained firmly on Iona, who was now swirling her brandy in a small glass, the liquid catching the ambient light in delicate patterns. Her eyes glistened with an unspoken challenge, her playful smile lingering like a promise. "Tell me, Commander Ray," Iona began, her voice smooth and filled with intent. "Why is it that humans, despite all their advancement, continue to spend so much time running towards self-destruction?" The question was a sharp contrast to the easy warmth of the previous conversation. Archer frowned, leaning back slightly. He could feel the weight of her words settle between them like a thick fog. "Self-destruction?" he repeated, taking a long sip of the Centaurian brandy. The alcohol burned his throat but seemed to fuel the conversation more than dull it. "That's a rather bleak perspective." "I see it in your eyes," she continued, her voice growing softer, almost intimate, as though she could see into the core of him. "The way you carry yourself. The hidden scars. You think I'm wrong?" Archer's pulse quickened. He didn't like where this conversation was heading, but there was something magnetic about her presence that made it hard to pull away. She was no ordinary being, of that, he was certain. "Everyone has scars," Archer said finally, shifting his posture and leaning slightly forward. He placed his drink on the table, his fingers tracing the rim of the glass. "Some are visible. Others are buried deep inside." Iona leaned in closer, her movements deliberate and graceful. There was something predatory in the way she circled him, as if testing for weaknesses. "Tell me, Commander, which ones do you hide? The ones from your past?" Archer couldn't help but smirk. "I don't hide anything." But even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't entirely true. Iona seemed to sense the inner conflict and allowed a fleeting smile. "Ah, so you think I'm probing for weakness, then?" "I think you're probing for something," he replied. "But it's not weakness. It's curiosity, I guess." "Curiosity," she repeated, considering the word. "How very human. I suppose I can indulge that, if you wish. But I will warn you, curiosity can be a dangerous thing." The tension between them crackled, an invisible thread of understanding weaving its way through the conversation. Archer's mind raced. There was more to Iona than met the eye. Something about her felt different, alien, but in a way that was both fascinating and unsettling. He was drawn to her, but he also sensed that she was not simply a mysterious stranger. She had layers, each one darker than the last. "I didn't ask for a lesson in human curiosity," Archer said, though the words came out less harshly than he intended. "I just wanted a drink and some peace. But if you're offering to indulge my curiosity, then," he paused, considering his words carefully. "Who are you really, Iona?" For the first time, a flicker of vulnerability crossed her face. It was fleeting, but Archer caught it. She looked away for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the vast expanse of space beyond the lounge's observation windows. Stars glimmered in the distance, scattered like dust across a black canvas. The silence between them stretched for a long, uncomfortable beat. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, tinged with something heavier. "I'm a soldier, Commander. Like you. But not of your kind. Not of your world." Archer's brow furrowed. "Not of my kind? You're a, what, exactly?" "I'm of the Inari," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "We were once a mighty empire, spread across half the galaxy. But we've fallen. We've been exiled to the fringes, forgotten by most, hunted by the rest." Her eyes met his, filled with a quiet, almost resigned sorrow. There was a hardness there too, a hardened edge that made Archer question just how much she was revealing. "I didn't ask for this war," she continued, her voice growing colder. "But it's been thrust upon me, thrust upon my people. You'd be surprised how quickly people forget, how quickly they turn their backs on you when you're no longer useful to them." Archer shifted in his seat, suddenly feeling the weight of his own questions. This wasn't some casual conversation anymore. Iona's past was tangled in something far deeper than a simple injury or a fleeting moment of camaraderie. "You're exiled?" he asked cautiously. "What does that mean?" "It means that my people are hunted, scattered, living in the shadows," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "The Galactic Coalition doesn't like to talk about it. They prefer to pretend we don't exist." Archer wasn't sure what to say. He had dealt with enough political intrigue, corruption, and hidden agendas in his career to know when someone was hiding more than they were revealing. Iona was one of those people. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "How did you end up here, at the Nexus station?" Iona's lips curled into a bitter smile. "A simple story, really. The same as anyone's. Survival. I came here seeking shelter, refuge. I thought I could leave the past behind me. But it's never that simple, is it?" "No, it never is," Archer murmured, glancing out at the stars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lounge was quiet, save for the distant hum of the station's engine and the soft clink of glasses being set down. Archer could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on them. Two people caught between their pasts and the future they were still trying to make sense of. "Tell me more," Archer said, leaning forward again, unable to shake the feeling that there was something more at play here. Something he needed to understand. Iona's eyes softened slightly, as though she were deciding whether to trust him. But then, before she could respond, the sound of a door sliding open interrupted the moment. Three figures entered the lounge, dressed in sleek black uniforms, their faces obscured by masks. Their presence was immediately imposing, and the entire atmosphere of the lounge shifted. Iona stiffened, her posture alert, and Archer's hand instinctively reached for the sidearm at his waist. One of the figures, taller than the others, strode confidently toward their table, his movements smooth and calculated. The others flanked him, their eyes scanning the room. Iona, the tall figure said, his voice low and commanding. It's time to leave. Archer stood, instinctively placing himself between Iona and the strangers. Iona's not going anywhere. The man's eyes narrowed, and he looked Archer up and down with obvious disdain. You don't know who you're dealing with, human. Step aside. Not a chance. Archer's tone was firm, his body tense as he positioned himself between Iona and the newcomers. Iona's hand brushed his arm, a subtle gesture, but enough to make Archer pause. I don't want trouble, Commander, she said softly, though her eyes were filled with something darker now. These men aren't just here for me. They're here for something much bigger. And you're involved now, whether you like it or not. The tall figure chuckled. She's right. You know, your fate is already sealed. Archer's mind raced. Something was very wrong. These figures weren't just there for Iona. They were after something much larger. And now, he was caught in the middle of it. What do you want? Archer demanded. What's this about? The figure's gaze remained cold, unreadable. You'll find out soon enough, human. But by then, it may be too late. Archer stood firm, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The three masked figures loomed before him, their presence both unsettling and ominous. He could feel the pulse of adrenaline flooding his bloodstream, every muscle tensed and ready. Beside him, Iona remained unnervingly calm, though Archer could sense the tension vibrating through her. The man who had spoken, tall, imposing, with a voice that cut through the air like a blade, stepped closer, his dark eyes scanning Archer's every movement. Despite his words, there was something calculating in the way he studied Archer, as if gauging his strength, his will to fight. You're playing a dangerous game, human, the tall figure said. His voice was low, the kind of tone that suggested familiarity with command. One you won't win. Archer's fingers curled into fists, but he didn't take his hand off the sidearm at his waist. It wasn't a threat. At least, not yet. But the way the figure spoke made Archer feel as if a line had already been crossed. A line neither of them could step back from. What do you want with Iona? Archer asked, keeping his voice steady, though every instinct in his body screamed to take action. He'd been in countless confrontations before, but something about these men, this situation, felt different. More dire. The tall figure smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring gesture. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered its prey, who knew victory was assured. Iona is valuable to us, he said slowly, savoring the words. Her talents, her knowledge, are what we need. And you, Commander Ray, he added, turning his gaze toward Archer. You've just made the mistake of getting involved in something you don't understand. Archer didn't flinch. Iona's not going anywhere with you. Iona's voice cut through the rising tension. He's right, she said, her words quiet but resolute. You don't know who you're dealing with. The tall figure's smile faded, replaced with a look of cold calculation. He exchanged a brief glance with the two other masked figures, both of whom had been eerily silent. They were like shadows, silent, watchful, waiting for their cue. For the first time, Archer saw the faintest flicker of something in the tall man's eyes. Not anger, but recognition, something familiar. He could see the gears turning in the man's mind, the realization that this confrontation was shifting. Iona was not just a person he could take without consequence. She was far more complicated than that. We don't have time for this, the tall figure muttered to his companions. Then, to Archer, he said, step aside, human. You have no idea what you're getting into. You're in over your head. Archer didn't move. I'm not afraid of you, he said, his voice unwavering. At that moment, a flicker of movement caught his eye. One of the figures on the left, a shadowy presence, made a sudden, fluid motion. Archer's instincts kicked in. He sidestepped quickly, just as the figure lunged. The masked man's arm brushed against Archer's side as he twisted in the air, but it was enough to throw him off balance. Archer's hand went straight to his sidearm. The room exploded into chaos. A shot rang out, the crack of energy reverberating through the small lounge. Archer fired on reflex, the beam of light streaking toward the attacker. The masked figure stumbled back, his body twitching as the energy blast hit its mark. The others, moving with terrifying precision, immediately responded, raising their weapons in unison. Archer's heart hammered in his chest. He was no longer just defending Iona. Now, he was fighting for his life. The air seemed to freeze for a fraction of a second as everything slowed, as if time itself had decided to hold its breath. Archer's mind raced. His eyes flicked to Iona, who hadn't moved. She was watching the scene unfold with a strange detachment, as if this was just another part of her life, just another battle to be fought. He snapped back to the present, his hand steady as he aimed at the remaining two attackers. But before he could fire again, a surge of energy shot from one of the masked figures, narrowly missing him. Archer ducked instinctively, his back hitting the edge of a nearby table, sending a jolt of pain through his spine. He gritted his teeth, refusing to show weakness. "Get down!" Iona shouted suddenly. Without thinking, Archer dropped to one knee, just as another surge of energy zipped past where his head had been moments before. The force of the blast knocked a nearby console loose, sending sparks flying across the room. "I said get down," Iona repeated, her voice now filled with urgency. Archer looked up. She wasn't standing still anymore. Iona moved with speed and grace that Archer could barely comprehend, her body a blur of motion as she closed the distance between herself and the remaining attackers. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost like a deadly dance. In the blink of an eye, she had disarmed one of the figures. Her fingers moved like lightning, wrenching the energy weapon from his hands, and in the same fluid motion, she thrust it into his chest. The masked man's body convulsed before he collapsed to the floor with a thud. The remaining figure hesitated, his weapon trained on Iona, but the moment of uncertainty was all she needed. Without breaking stride, she lashed out, a sharp, calculated strike that sent the weapon flying across the room. Her other hand landed on the man's shoulder, twisting with such force that Archer heard the sickening crack of bone. The man dropped to the floor, his mask skidding across the ground. Silence fell over the room. Archer blinked, still processing the speed and efficiency of what had just transpired. Iona stood over the fallen figures, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. The room smelled of ionized air and the faintest trace of burned metal. A few sparks still danced along the floor, but for the moment, the immediate threat had passed. "I told you to get down," she said again, her tone a little more subdued, but still sharp. She turned toward Archer, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "I didn't think you'd be that fast," Archer said, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. He holstered his sidearm, his eyes scanning the now motionless attackers. "I'm not just fast," Iona replied, her gaze lingering on the two fallen bodies before she wiped her hands on her uniform. "I'm efficient." Her voice was colder now, the playful tone from before completely gone. She turned to face Archer fully, her eyes dark with something that hinted at deeper emotions. "And you," she added, her voice low and serious, "should have listened. You have no idea what you're really up against." Archer stood, brushing himself off, but his mind was reeling from the brief but intense fight. He hadn't expected Iona to be so capable. He had known she wasn't like other people. But this was something else entirely. And now, it seemed like he was tangled up in a situation far beyond his understanding. "What happens now?" Archer asked, his voice hoarse. "I assume these guys weren't just here for a chat." Iona turned away, her expression hardening. "Now," she said, her voice dark and filled with an edge Archer hadn't heard before, "we prepare for the next wave. This isn't over, Commander. It's only just begun." Archer wasn't sure what to make of her words, but one thing was certain. He had just stepped into something far deeper than he could have imagined. And Iona, this woman with secrets, scars, and hidden strength, was now at the center of it all. For better or for worse, Archer was in this fight. And there was no turning back. The silence after the fight was suffocating. Archer wiped his brow with a shaky hand, his thoughts racing. The brief but intense battle had rattled him more than he cared to admit. Iona, on the other hand, stood unmoving, her figure like a shadow in the dim light of the room. The adrenaline was still humming in his system, making it hard to think clearly. His mind kept returning to one single, terrifying thought. Who were these people, and what did they want with Iona? Iona broke the silence, her voice cold as ice. We don't have much time. They'll be back with reinforcements. Archer didn't need to ask who she meant. The tall figure, the one who had spoken earlier, wasn't just a random attacker. There was something personal about the way he had looked at Iona, something that hinted at a much larger game being played. But what was it? He opened his mouth to speak, but Iona raised a hand, signaling for him to stay quiet. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, the air felt thick with impending danger. Where are we going? Archer asked, his voice barely above a whisper, unsure of how to move forward. Iona finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I need to show you something. With that, she turned on her heel and began walking briskly toward the exit. Archer followed closely, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. His mind was still processing everything, the fight, Iona's abilities, the strange masked men, but something about her demeanor told him she wasn't finished talking. Not yet. They made their way through the complex, passing empty corridors lit only by flickering lights. Archer had been in these halls countless times, but now they felt different, dangerous, alive with the threat of something he couldn't quite understand. Iona moved with the grace of someone who had lived through this kind of danger before. She navigated the facility like she knew every inch of it, every secret passage and hidden corner. Finally, they reached a door at the far end of the hall. Iona paused, her hand hovering over the control panel beside it. This is where things get complicated, she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that made Archer's chest tighten. Whatever happens next, you need to understand something. This isn't just about you or me anymore. We're at the center of something far bigger. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Iona stepped inside, beckoning Archer to follow. He hesitated for a split second before stepping in after her. Inside was a room like nothing he had ever seen. The walls were covered in glowing screens, all displaying data streams, star maps, and cryptic symbols that seemed to shift and change as if they were alive. The centerpiece of the room was a massive, pulsating object, hovering in the center like some kind of alien technology. Archer took a cautious step forward, his eyes drawn to the object. It was a strange, shimmering orb, covered in intricate carvings and emitting a soft, eerie glow. The air around it seemed to hum with energy, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. What is this? Archer asked, his voice barely audible. Iona's eyes were fixed on the orb, her expression hard to read. This, she said slowly, is the key to everything. She stepped closer to the orb, her fingers tracing the carvings on its surface. This is what they've been after. What they'll do anything to control. Archer's heart raced as he glanced between Iona and the orb. Who are they, Iona? Who is trying to take this? Iona let out a long breath, her eyes finally meeting his. There was a deep sadness in them, something Archer hadn't noticed before. They're not just anyone. They're the Syndicate, the people who run the galaxy from the shadows. They've been hunting this artifact for decades, ever since they found out what it can do. Archer swallowed hard, trying to process the information. What does it do? Iona's lips tightened. It can manipulate space itself, bend the laws of physics. It's a technology unlike anything we've ever seen. Whoever controls it has the power to reshape the universe. Archer's mind spun. A device that could control the very fabric of reality itself? It sounded like something out of a dream, but looking at Iona's face, he knew she wasn't lying. How do you know all this? Archer asked, his voice low, almost afraid to hear the answer. Iona hesitated for a moment, then turned back toward the orb. Her fingers hovered just above its surface, as if afraid to touch it again. Because it's mine. The words hit Archer like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, trying to make sense of what she had just said. Yours? How is this yours? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked around the orb, her fingers brushing against the symbols carved into its surface. I was born to protect it, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been hiding from the Syndicate my entire life. They've been hunting me, trying to force me to hand it over. But I've never been able to give it up, Archer. I can't. Archer's mind reeled as the pieces began to fall into place. Iona wasn't just a skilled fighter or a woman with hidden abilities. She was connected to something far more dangerous, far more powerful. She was the key to everything. You've been running from them all this time, Archer said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. You've been hiding because of this. Iona nodded, her gaze distant. Yes, but it's not just about hiding anymore. They're getting closer. They're already on their way. If we don't stop them now, everything we know, could be destroyed. Archer stood in stunned silence for a moment, his mind struggling to catch up. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a battle for the very future of the galaxy. What do we do now? He asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Iona's eyes locked onto his, her expression filled with determination. We fight. We have no choice. Before Archer could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. The Syndicate was closing in. He could hear their voices growing louder, their harsh tones cutting through the silence of the facility. Iona turned toward the door, her eyes narrowing with resolve. Get to the control room, she said, her voice urgent. I'll hold them off. Archer didn't hesitate. He knew there was no time to argue. He nodded and turned, sprinting toward the door at the far end of the room. He didn't look back as Iona moved toward the entrance, preparing to face the Syndicate head-on. He could hear the sounds of battle as he ran, the hiss of energy blasts and the clash of metal against metal. The fight had only just begun. As Archer reached the control room, he slammed his hand against the terminal, trying to access the facility's security systems. He could hear Iona's voice in the distance, steady and commanding as she took on the Syndicate's forces. But the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. The orb was powerful, too powerful. In the wrong hands, it could reshape the galaxy, destroy entire civilizations, or rewrite the very laws of existence. Iona had been running from them for years, hiding, protecting it with her life. Now, there was no more running. The Syndicate would stop at nothing to get it. And Iona? She would stop at nothing to protect it. Archer keyed in the final command on the terminal, locking down the facility's outer doors, sealing the Syndicate in. The room shook as a distant explosion rocked the building, and Archer turned to face the battle unfolding beyond the control room's walls. In that moment, he understood something crucial. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about choice. And as the Syndicate's forces closed in on them, Archer made his choice. The fight was only beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. Iona had no choice but to trust Archer now, and he had no choice but to trust her. Together, they would face the Syndicate, and together, they would decide the future of the galaxy.